First off, I love my kids.
This is Learning to Dad
I'm the cool dad. That's my thing.
with Tyler Ross.
What I do have are a very particular set of skills.
I'm gonna have fun, and you're gonna have fun.
Hi, this is Learning to Dad, and I'm Tyler Ross, and my guest today is Dr. Brian DeCastro. Brian's a urologist with Fauquier Health in Warrenton, Virginia, a graduate from State University of New York Upstate Medical University. He's performed over 2,000 vasectomies. He's a CrossFitter and practices Taekwondo in his free time and is also a father to 4 girls. Thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So as we were talking about leading into this, or the first time we met, as a parent, there's not really any way to measure how effective you are as a parent, whereas in business or as a doctor, perform this many successful surgeries, or you've got this on your balance sheet. So the effort that we're putting in here is to try to help people along the way in the intangible ways that we can to make better decisions as parents. And just in the first few minutes of talking to you, I got that calm, great bedside manner, which I can only imagine you have with your kids. So I'm excited to have that conversation with you. So thank you again. Start with a little bit of background. I really don't know each other at all. I'm curious to know where you're from and what kind of brought you into medical school. Take me on that quick journey.
Yeah, so I was born out in Tacoma, Washington. My dad was in the military. He graduated from West Point and was flying helicopters out there. And, basically grew up as an Army brat, kind of moved around a lot when I was younger, but settled in upstate New York for most of my life. And, really, I don't know how I always kind of gravitated towards science and medicine and loved that stuff, fascinated by the human body, and kind of always knew from a young age I wanted to be a doctor. And, basically joined the Army, went through medical school, and was stationed out in Fort Lewis and down at Fort Stewart, Georgia, and did 11 years. And when I got out, I decided, we're looking for a random place to live, and kind of ended up here in Warrenton, Virginia.
That's a lot going on in a really short couple sentences. At what point in time did you meet your wife?
So actually, she was also in the Army as well, and we were both stationed out at Fort Lewis. And she was going through the OR nursing, the operating room nurse course when I was in residency. And so we actually met in an OR room doing a procedure, so it was kind of interesting, and then just kind of kept passing each other in the hospital until finally one day we actually went out on a date.
Yeah. So how long did you date before you got married?
So actually about 2 months after we started dating, she was deployed to Iraq. And so she was in Mosul for a year. She was there with the Combat Support Hospital. And so we just kept in touch. I mean, there were some months we talked on the phone for, I think it was like 4,000 minutes. And,
wow.
We would work our schedules around the time difference and, talk for, at least an hour. It seemed like an hour a day. And wrote letters, emails, letters, those kind of things,
So about when is this?
She was deployed in October 2005 and got back in October of 2006. So it was a full year. It was an interesting way to kind of date because, it was all basically communicating and talking. And so you kind of had that part of the relationship established, which I think a lot of time nowadays people don't take the time to really get to know each other. And I think that was kind of, in some ways, a benefit. It was hard, but also worked in our favor.
Yeah, that's amazing to think that you were dating for 2 months and then sustained that relationship without basically seeing each other for a year.
Yeah, I mean, I think she had like a 2-week, they call it R&R, where she came back to the United States. But other than that, it was, basically just emails. And they were just starting to get some of the video, stuff.
Oh, sure.
It was like the choppy one word at a time kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was an interesting start to the relationship.
Yeah, I bet. So did she come back different than when she left?
I think definitely in some ways, not a major change, but I think just a definite respect for the quality of life that we have here in the United States and how we're protected. And almost in a way, she was almost kind of angry when she got back because she felt like the average person didn't understand that.
Yeah.
You know, they took everything for granted. They would get mad at the littlest things and, you know, not appreciate what they had. And I think that was one of the changes that I noticed in her when she got back. But other than that, she's pretty much the same person.
Were you deployed at all?
I wasn't, actually. I was in for 11 years, and just the timing of everything, I never ended up getting deployed. Urologists, they only sent about one every 6 months, and they were good about protecting us until we finished our boards. And then by the time the boards were done, we were kind of pulling out of Iraq, and we hadn't started sending Army urologists to Afghanistan at that point. So I kind of almost felt like I cheated a little bit, but felt guilty not having deployed in that time, but it just didn't work out.
I think that's a common feeling among people who are in a branch of the military who ultimately don't get deployed, that some guilt as you have peers that might have been deployed multiple times,
right.
But that's not really anything you can control.
Definitely, yeah.
So your wife or your girlfriend at the time comes back from Iraq, and then at what point do you get married?
So it was about another year. I think we were engaged in July of 2017, and then we were married in 2007, and we were married in 2008, June of 2008.
Okay, and then your first daughter?
Oh, well, we found out that October that we were pregnant. So
No
it was
kidding.
about, right after we had gotten married. And yeah, I mean, pretty much our entire first 10 years of marriage she's either been pregnant or breastfeeding, you know, with the 4 kids. And
first question I want to ask is, in October of 2008, that would mean your first daughter's, you know, summer 2009 birthday.
Yep.
So
June, yeah.
where were you in your professional life at that point?
So in 2008, I graduated from residency. So I was I graduated from residency, we got married, and then 2 weeks later we drove across country to Georgia to start as a, you know, practicing urologist. And it was kind of a unique situation. I was basically sent as a solo urologist to the Fort Stewart, Georgia. So I had nobody else there. It was just me as the only urologist for about 3 years.
Wow.
And so it was kind of like being thrown right into the deep end, right out of training. But I felt like the program that I was in, and they really trained me well. And I was able to, you know, I just had to be able to think on my own and react on my own, and, you know, relied on consultation, you know, with some of the difficult cases. But for the most part, was kind of forced to jump right into it.
So that sounds like a lot of transitioning at one time. You're moving where you live, you're married, you're in a new place, and you're just graduating, and you've got a baby. So like, how's the baby impact all of those other things? Like, how, like, do suddenly you have to manage your time differently, or you know, manage your lifestyle differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think as all dads know, I mean, the day that child comes home from the hospital, your whole life is completely turned around. I mean, the priorities, everything is totally different. And, you know, from that day on, you're basically focused on your kids and making that a priority as well, and trying to balance work, balance your personal sanity, and also raise children at the same time, and maintain a marriage, you know, which is sometimes the thing that suffers the most when you're dealing with all that stuff.
And your wife, tell me your wife's name.
Janet.
Was Janet an OR nurse in Georgia as well, or
She
did
was.
she stay
In
at
fact,
home?
she was an OR nurse up until about the week before our daughter was born, and then since that time she's been at home.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah,
okay.
She, I mean, just such rapid fire, you know, kids after that. And so at this point with 4 kids, 9 and under, you know, her job is probably more difficult than most average jobs, you know. 8 to 5, I think anybody would realize that that's a pretty tough job.
I couldn't agree with you more. My wife went back to work after, I want to say it was 3 years of staying at home, and I think both of us have noticed how much that she was doing when she was at home, because things start falling apart slowly when there's not that person taking care of your house, and, you know, a lot of just general affairs of life that are easy to miss when everybody's at work. So at what time did you have your second daughter?
So we found out that we were pregnant on our 1-year anniversary. Wait, would that be right? Yeah.
Yeah.
We found out we were on our 1-year anniversary right around that week. It was our daughter's birthday is June 28th. Our anniversary is June 21st. And somewhere around that time was when we found out we were pregnant with the second child.
Okay. And at that point, we've had the discussion already, but for the sake of people listening, you know, just to kind of jump into the idea of not having any more kids, if you don't mind sharing your thought process on, after having two, do I want to have any more?
Yeah, so I think, that's a time when you're kind of really more susceptible to thinking, man, this is a lot. I have two kids. At that point when the one was born, the oldest was not quite 2. It was 21 months difference. And so you have a newborn, you have a 21-month-old, and, it just seems very overwhelming. And I think there's a temptation at that point to say, this is enough. I'm done having kids. And I think that was the longest gap, was between the second and third, for that reason, because we kind of thought about, do we really want to have more kids? And, if we do, how many more? And when is the timing right? And I think it's, my wife has said that she always wanted to have 4 kids. So I don't know how much of a decision it was for her, but, for me, the idea of having 4 kids seemed like a lot. And
sure.
It took us about probably another 2 years before we decided to have that third.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad. I couldn't imagine not having 4 kids now.
I'm sure. Yeah.
And she always says if we were younger, she'd go for 6. But,
is that right?
I'm 40, almost 42, and she's almost 38. So we kind of figure it's time to watch the family grow up and do some of the things that we've been putting off for a while.
Well, tell me a little bit about the transition of 2 kids to 3 kids. I mean, the overused phrase is, going from man to man to dropping into zone. So, like, I've heard that having a 3rd kid is just like folding another one in the mix, and I've also heard that it's like a whole new strategy. Yeah,
see, I kind of I've always heard that same thing too, and I thought, actually, for me, I thought going from 2 to 3 was the hardest.
Yeah.
My wife definitely thought 1 to 2.
Yeah.
But I thought, for me, I thought 2 to 3 was the hardest, and I think it's that idea that, worst case scenario, you each had 1 kid and you were dealing with the issues that one kid was having, but now there's like all of a sudden this baby, that's there, and you're like, well, who's going to get the baby now? I'm doing this, and so you have to kind of delegate a little bit better, and I thought for me that was the most challenging time. Now from 3 to 4, I would agree that felt like nothing. At that point it just felt like, second nature. But I thought that transition from man to zone was a lot tougher.
So did you make any like super deliberate changes? Like, I'm suddenly doing a block schedule now, or I'm suddenly shifting the way that I approach my work, or you taking on a new mental practice to stay sane while these changes are happening at home?
I would say no, and that was probably to my detriment.
Yeah.
Trying to live my life exactly the same as we had more kids,
Mm-hmm.
until once we had the 4th, and the stressors of work, the stressors of relationship, all that stuff starts to get to weigh you down. You have to find some sort of outlet to kind of help you to deal with the stress of things. And I think for me, starting Taekwondo and doing CrossFit have been those kind of outlets, to give me a little bit of my own time where I can just be by myself and trying to relax.
Yeah.
Because I think, no matter what kind of person you are, I mean, being a father, having a job, being in a marriage, it's all stressful stuff that kind of wears on you day to day.
Yeah, it requires work and maintenance and conscious effort. You can't just click into cruise control and then just lay out, in my opinion.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Does your wife have things that, like to your Taekwondo or to your CrossFit? She have?
She loves spin and those kind of things. She likes working out and going to the gym, so that's kind of her release as well.
Yeah.
But she's really, her patience level and her ability to handle the day-to-day stuff is amazing. I mean, I'm constantly impressed with how well she does with that, and rarely do you ever see her raise her voice or get angry with the kids. And I may appear calm, but I can be very, when the kids get going, it kind of, sometimes my reaction is not always the best. And, finding ways to be a better dad as far as dealing with those frustrating moments when your tendency is to yell or to get angry.
Mm-hmm.
What is another way that I can deal with this, and how can I approach this in a different manner? And I think being in a mix of Irish and, mostly Sicilian, that kind of temper tends to be there. And for me, the biggest thing has been learning to deal with that side of things, and just trying to be that dad that's calm and, here's why we're going to do it this way, and, this is why we're not going to do that.
Do you have anything that like snaps you into that calmness? Like, I can take 3 deep breaths and count to 3 so that I don't freak out on my kids.
Yeah, I would say the deep breathing is definitely very helpful.
Yeah.
And my wife, she's constantly trying to help me to find ways to be a better dad, a better husband.
Yeah.
And probably I should be doing more of that on my own. But she actually got me a book recently. It was called When Good Men Get Angry, I think was the name of the book. And it was really interesting. It was a bunch of different men that he was a pastor or counselor, and he would basically interview kind of like what you're doing, but with different couples, going through times in their relationship where they were dealing with different stressors. And it was the different types of guys and how they get angry and helping them to deal with those triggers that kind of set them off and helping them to see what personality flaws led them down that road. And I think the big takeaway point from that was, it's natural for men especially to get frustrated and to get angry. But what's unnatural is being able to process those emotions and finding ways to deal with it and to make you a better person. And I think for me, that book has been very helpful. I'm kind of in the middle of reading that right now.
Cool.
So it's an interesting read. I wish I could tell you the author's name off the top of my head, but it definitely is something. I believe it's When Good Men Get Angry is the name of the book. And I'm sure nowadays with Google, you can find that pretty easy.
Yeah, I'm trying to go through the same thing, as part of this exercise of doing these interviews and reading and listening to other podcasts is trying to be better. And that requires being different than you are now. And if you're pretty happy with the way you are now, that requires getting over some fear of change and being vulnerable to trying something and failing at it. Do you notice anything in particular that you've changed or tried to change?
Well, I think, like you said, if you're not, part of a lot of people's problem is that they don't perceive that there's a problem. So like you said, you're happy with the way you are. You don't think that you need to do anything different. If only these kids would just listen to what I say, then I wouldn't get angry.
Right.
I wouldn't yell. And unfortunately, they're kids, and they're not going to always do what you say. And it's really up to you to be able to make that change in the way that you respond to them. It is more important in the long run. Because, like my wife said, do you want your kids to remember you as an angry, yelling dad all the time? Or do you want them to remember you as a loving dad who took the time to listen to them and talk to them? And, I think that was one of those comments that kind of got to me. I said, I do need to do something different. I can't just be getting angry all the time or getting frustrated. And I think you have to have that one ability to look at yourself and say, okay, what I'm doing is not really the right way. And there is a better way to do this. And I do need to make those extra steps to make the change. And I think that's the hardest part, especially if you're, type A, kind of very, opinionated, person. It's hard for you to, you always want to be right. You never want to be wrong about anything. And so admitting that you're not doing things perfectly can be a hard step.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the biggest challenge, is getting past that and saying, I need to do something different. And I think it just makes you a better person in general, not only a good dad, but just in dealing with people on a daily basis.
Yeah. It's very freeing to fall on your face and realize it's not a big deal in efforts of changing.
Right.
Jesse Straight said something about asking his kids for forgiveness, and I'd never considered that. And I did something that upset one of my kids the other day, and I sat him down and I said, will you please forgive me? And I had this rush of nerves, like, what happens if my kid doesn't forgive me? But she's a 4-year-old kid. She just smiled, gave me a hug, and walked away.
Right.
Like, that wasn't as bad as I felt. More vulnerable than I needed to feel.
Right.
And do you think having 4 daughters that's a challenge?
Yeah, I think I grew up
especially to a man who you're about to tell me you got siblings or men in your life.
Yeah, I had 2 brothers growing up, so it was just 3 boys in the house, and so our way of growing up was so much different, and I feel bad for my mom in retrospect, just having to deal with men all the time, boys and men. But I think for me, just the emotional side of things and that idea of I feel like with a boy, at least growing up, it seemed like people would yell at you and be like, don't do that. But it didn't seem to affect me as much as it seems to affect the girls. You yell at a girl and they just break down into these tears and daddy's so mean. And, that kind of side of things, it was hard for me to understand. And so I think, for daughters especially, that's another thing that my wife would always say to me. Your daughters are going to pick the kind of guy that you are. And so if you're constantly yelling, and you don't want them to settle for somebody who's going to treat them that way. So you need to show them what it's like to be treated by a man appropriately.
Yeah.
And so that's another one of those things that, those comments that stick in your mind when you're like, do I really need to make a change? Yes. I mean, for that reason, I need to make a change because I want my daughters to expect to be treated with respect and not to have somebody yelling at them and, to be able to stand up for themselves. And so, I mean, to me, that's one of the most important things, just that they understand that their value and that, they can't let another man dictate who they are and who they can be. And I think that's a really important thing for young daughters.
Yeah, that resonates with me heavily because I've heard a lot of people use the expression, she married her father.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, now I've got an obligation to be good enough for my daughter.
Right.
And that hits really hard. Every single circumstances, how would I want someone else to treat her?
Exactly.
I got to treat her that way. So with your wife, how different are your parenting styles?
Oh, I mean, I think she just, like I said before, she has this calmness that I can't understand. I never see her she'll get a little bit flustered if, when it's the, hey mama, all four of them at once trying to, gets a little bit overwhelmed, but she never really loses her cool. She almost never yells. She'll get right down on their level and explain to them, this is why we're going to do it this way. And, just watching her has really given me a lot of tools to be a better dad, because, I grew up in more of an, just kind of more of an old school household. You do it that way because I said, I wouldn't get a lot of explanation from my mom. And so, is that kind of like, you're the child, you just listen to the parent, and that's just the way it is. But kids every personality is different, and I tend to be that question asker, but why are we doing it that way?
Yeah.
Like, I understand there's a rule, but why is that the rule? That kind of more inquisitive type. Or if they'd say there's no more popsicles in the freezer, my mom would have to lift me up and show me the freezer to prove to me that it wasn't there.
Right.
And I see that now in my second child. I mean, she is my almost identical, the way that we look at life and question and do things. And so having that perspective and being able to explain to her in those situations, even when I might be getting frustrated with her questions, just to remember that's how I learned, and that's how I wanted to be explained to me. So another great book that is out there, I'm going to totally draw a blank on this. It's a book about personalities, and I, for the life of me, cannot think of the name. But it basically talks about the 4 core personalities that are out there. Basically how parents and the kids of different personalities or the same personalities interact.
Yeah.
And that's given me a lot of insight into dealing with the different personality types of my children. Oh, I wish I could think of the name of that book right now. But basically what it is, my personality tends to be, they call it the powerful choleric. So always want to be right, type A type personality, whereas my first daughter tends to be this, what they call peaceful phlegmatic. She doesn't get excited about the good. She doesn't get too worked up about the bad. Even keel. Sometimes you even wonder if she has emotions, because she's so even. And just, my being able to deal with that, not understanding how she could go through life so passive.
Yeah.
And not have those opinions, whereas I want her to have that fire, where she doesn't necessarily have that, and learning to deal with that and how to manage that personality type, versus my second daughter, who's more like my personality, and how do we now butt heads having the exact same personality type, where and so it's a great book. If it comes to me, I'll spit it out there. But
please. Well, something I'm taking away already is just you have put a lot of thought into being a parent, that you're not just kind of shooting from the hip, that you're actually reading and studying and actively trying to make change. Like, I believe, I don't know, maybe you can differ, but probably agree that to be a better parent, you have to constantly be exploring yourself and trying to improve yourself. I feel like it's an obligation as a parent to do that for the benefit of your kids. Like, you seem to be actively pursuing information to be more conscious.
And I think really just in life in general, we all tend to go on autopilot, and we just get into the rut and routine of every day, and we forget that there's a bigger journey out there that we're on, and if we're not careful, we're going to miss that part of life. And in order to experience it, we need to be more, what my wife always tells me is you have to be present. You know, you can't just be here at home. You can't just be here around the kids, but you have to be present in the moment with the family. Otherwise, it's like you're not there. Yeah. And so trying to separate work from home and, you know, not being on the phone searching for the latest news article or whatever that's out there, and just putting the phone away and just being there for the girls. And I think that's part of the challenge, and just continuing to grow, I think, in life. And I think the day that you stop trying to learn and stop trying to improve, I mean, that would be a terrible day, because we can all, to the day we die, continue to learn and grow.
I completely agree. So
it's really, I mean, it's great that you're doing this podcast, because I think, like you said, you get so many different, unique perspectives from different fields. And
learned a ton. So tell me, since having your first child, and that was, I guess, 9-10 years ago, how have you changed or improved as a dad?
I would like to think I've become a more patient person.
Yeah.
You know, and just being able to deal with things a lot more calmly. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if you asked my wife if she would agree with that, but I think she's seen some improvement, you know, in the way, and really just in trying to be a better husband from that standpoint as well. You know, Nate, by my nature in general, is to be very defensive, you know, and so she approached me with something, and I automatically explained to her why that's not true, or, you know, and just stopping and being able to listen now, and before I start trying to formulate my rebuttal or my counter to that, and just, you know, trying to listen and understand where she's coming from. And I think, you know, that translates to the kids as well, trying to listen and find out where they're coming from, you know, and I think so maybe being a slightly better listener, a little bit more patient, and I think those things take time. You know, it's not overnight that you're going to make those changes, and there'll be many relapses where you fall back into your old habits. But as long as there's more victories than losses, you know, in the end, you're making an improvement.
I completely agree. And along that same line, it might be too easy now, but if you could have done something differently earlier in your journey as a dad, like what might you have done differently?
I would say, you know, these books, just probably reading more about these different types of things, and not necessarily specifically about being a dad, but in general just being a better person, because I think that translates into being a better dad. You know, being able to deal with the temper issues and the defensiveness and those kind of things will in the end translate into being a better dad, which you don't automatically think of. You know, you think of those as more of a, like, dealing with yourself as a person. But if you're not, you know, able to do that, then you're not going to be a good dad. You're not going to be a good husband. Yeah. And so taking those steps to make yourself a better person translate into the, you know, victories on the other side as well.
1,000% with you. I couldn't agree with you more. Change gears a little bit. With 4 girls, 4 kids in general, the metaphor that I use, or simile I use, is you know, punishment like a bowling lane. Like, I want my kid to, I want to be the bumpers in the gutter so they don't end up in the gutter. But if, you know, they hit 1 pen or 10 pens, they need to learn on their own. So I perceive the bumpers in the gutters being, you know, for lack of a better word, punishment. Like how do you keep your kids in their lane? Like, how do you have some things that, you know, do or don't do when it comes to punishment, good experiences, bad experiences, managing their behavior?
Well, I think one thing we feel pretty strongly about is no physical punishment, so no spanking or anything like that, especially with girls in particular, and not that should really matter, but so that's one thing we've kind of taken off the table. I think more of kind of the idea of taking away things that are important to them. You know, they love their Kindles, or, you know, they love their treats, you know, ice cream after dinner or whatever, so we'll kind of use those are our bargaining tools. And, you know, I think the other big thing is really, I mean, kids are little people, and I think we tend to, and the older generations tended to kind of discard kids' feelings and opinions. And, you know, so trying to explain to them, hey, this is why what you did was wrong, and this is why we got upset, and this is what you can do better next time so that we don't get into the same situation. And on the same token, you have to be willing to do that for yourself. So you say, you know, Daddy yelled at you, and that was a mistake. I shouldn't have got angry, and I shouldn't have yelled. And so I think by showing them that you can admit that you've done something wrong and you can apologize for that, it teaches them that it's okay for them to do that as well. So I think really just being consistent. I think if you say something, you have to mean it.
Yeah.
And I think kids are smart. If you say, like, if you do that, we're not going to go here, and then you go there anyway, they're going to learn, hey, they don't mean it, and we can manipulate them. But as long as you're consistent, you're on the same page, I think they know. It doesn't take them long to figure out that if I do something bad, I'm going to have a consequence for this. Yeah. And I think if you can provide that kind of structure, I think that in general the kids are pretty good, because they know you mean business. I think the mistake that many parents make too many times is just, giving too many chances, not following through on what they said they were going to do. And sometimes it's hard. I mean, you don't want to take away ice cream from a kid, and then watch the three other girls eat ice cream and they're sitting there, visibly upset about it.
Yeah.
But they'll remember that next time when they go to do whatever it is, that they did. And I think that's really, it feels painful in that moment, but the lesson that they learn for the lifetime is far worth it, because you can't just go through life getting your way all the time. And I think, the tendency nowadays as parents is to try to give our kids as much as we can and make their life as easy as it can be. And I think we lose a lot of the, you don't learn a lot of the values of life that you need to succeed. And
why do you suppose that's a tendency? Do you feel like it's a response to the way, the parenting generation was brought up, or just the nature of a parent is to want to give their kid everything? Or
yeah, I don't know what caused the shift, but I mean, just even from our parents' age till now, I mean, it seems like a huge difference. And I don't know what it is, if each generation has gotten more, so they've become a little softer, so they've kind of become softer in the, and it's just been passed down. But I mean, if you look what our parents probably had to put up with as kids, I mean, is probably dramatically different than what we even had to put up with as kids, and to now what our kids go through. I mean, I don't even know if kids play outside anymore. It just seems like everything's electronic and everything's handed to them. And, I feel like those are the kind of things we have to be careful not to fall into that trap of, hey, so-and-so's parents got them a phone, so I have to give my kid a phone now. Or, trying to resist some of the tendencies of the culture. And that's difficult because, I mean, my 9-year-old's already asking me for a cell phone. And
Wow. Yeah.
I don't know when I'm not wise enough at this point to know when the right time to give a kid a cell phone is, but you rely on the parents who have teenagers and, what did you do? How did you do it? And so I'm more of a younger kind of parent mentality at this point in time, but yeah, it's tough. I mean, all those things.
Let's talk about the devices a little bit, like Kindles and iPads and such. I mean, do you restrict the amount of time that they get for one reason or another, whether it be blue light or just going outside and getting some sun or, anything?
Definitely. I mean, obviously the homework has to be done. We try to limit the amount of time that they're on it. And also, a lot of it depends on how they've been acting, so that's another one of those kind of bargaining tools. Hey, you haven't been as respectful to mom, or you haven't been helping out, or you've been kind of mean to your sisters, so maybe you don't get to use the Kindle today. Yeah. And I think that's important because, it's easy when we're all stressed and all four of them are running around the house, or they're, keep coming up to you. I'm trying to get notes done, to say, hey, go sit there and play on your Kindle. And that's the easy thing to do, but usually not the right thing to do. Yeah. And so we have to fight that tendency. And I think try to get out there outside with them and do more of those kind of engaging activities.
So this may or may not be applicable to your practice as a urologist, but do you have an opinion about your kids keeping a cell phone in their pocket?
Oh, as far as from a safety standpoint,
yeah.
I mean, I know that for myself, I'm always reluctant to do that. And even I find myself, like, at night sometimes fall asleep with the cell phone by your head, or in the morning when you're hitting the snooze, that cell phone, it always gives me a little pause. I don't know how much data there is out there to actually say one way or the other that's harmful, but I mean, I guess I've had a cell phone in my pocket for a long time, and I have 4 daughters, so it didn't seem to have much of an effect from that standpoint, I guess. But who knows? I mean, nowadays kids are getting, I mean, I didn't get one till I graduated college, and kids are getting them at a very young age.
Yeah, I remember having the first thing I had was a pager, a beeper. Yeah. I got too far from home on my bicycle. I had a pocket full of quarters and a pager. I wasn't really thinking about
you had to find a
radio
payphone
transmissions or anything.
I mean, in some ways that was an advantage, because you always be like, you know what, Dad, I just couldn't find a payphone, or I didn't have a quarter. Nowadays you have no excuse. You can be GPS tracked on your cell phone. So
as an Army brat, did that change kind of your perspective on stability or being in one place or making friends when it comes to being a parent and settling down?
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely affected me in the way. I was always I was the oldest child, and I was always a little bit shy and reserved. And so for me, that like constant moving and having to meet new people, it was very difficult. And I think that, that was a big reason I got out of the Army when I did, was my oldest daughter was, I got out in 2013. So she would have been 4 around 4 the time I got out, probably 3 technically, around the time I got out of the Army. And my main reason for doing so was to provide her that stability where she wasn't jumping from elementary school to elementary school, just because I was never a huge fan of that. Now, if you ask my wife, she feels differently about it. She grew up as a Navy brat, and they moved around a lot, and she loved kind of like going to different places and meeting new people. And she's always says, I'm always open to moving and doing things if you ever want to.
So is that you think just like a spirit? She was just born with that, I want to ride a horseback with the wind in my hair type of thing?
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, I tend to be I don't like change kind of person. So, and that may be why I don't like change as much. But it doesn't seem to bother her. She always says if you said let's move to Seattle today, we'd move to Seattle. So
yeah,
she tends to be more of a free spirit when it comes to that kind of stuff.
I'd be interested to know, this is a kind of a hard tangent, but your perspective on educating your kids. You're highly educated going through medical school. Like, do you feel like your kids are going to have a similar trajectory, elementary, middle school, high school, college, maybe something else?
I mean, I think most parents would like to see their kids graduate from college, at a minimum. I think sometimes I don't know if that's realistic for every kid in every family. And so I think you have to be prepared that one of your kids may not feel that way. And, it just depends. I think for me, the most important thing is that I raise a child who is self-sufficient, who can, go out into society and have an impact. And what they choose to do with that is really up to them. I don't feel we have a family friend who, she says, my kids are going to Harvard and they're going to be either a lawyer or doctor, and that's it. Like, that's the only thing that's acceptable to her.
Wow.
I'm not one of those parents who feels like, you need to be a doctor because I'm a doctor. I think they can really be whatever they want to be. Some things are a little bit harder than others. My oldest says she wants to be an artist, and I think, well, that's great. It's just a lot harder to make it, to be successful as an artist. And whereas my, second child wants to be an engineer, and I think, we need more engineers, and that seems like a more stable kind of trajectory. So I think, you have to support them in whatever they want to do, as long as, it's not harmful to them in some way.
Yeah. I figure, would you rather your kid be rich or happy?
Right.
And my answer, I know exactly what I want.
Right. As long as they're contributing to society in some productive way, that's really the most important thing. The schooling itself, like you said, I would love it if they'd all graduate. I would feel successful if I got all 4 of my daughters through college. That would be a great day, but obviously not 100% necessary to being a successful parent.
So tell me what a successful parent looks like. Like, as a father, what do you feel like your role is for your kids now? And then, if you want to expand on what you think it is after they've left.
I think now it's giving them an example of what it is to be a good person. And I think in how to be a good member in society. And it's not just about having a good job and making a lot of money, but how are you impacting your community? How are you treating other people? What is most important in life? And trying to find that balance of hard work and being a good person. And I think that's the most important thing we can teach our kids. And if they can come out at the end, like I said, just basically successful members of society that contribute in some positive way, that's successful parenting.
I think that's a wonderful answer. I think that's really great. What is something that you want to continue to work on as a parent?
I think just those same things for me, the patience level, listening, being a more compassionate father as far as my daughters go. I think that is really my main focus right now. And really, I don't think that really ties in with being a good husband as well. And I think, I think in some ways that's the hardest job, is being a good husband. A lot of times you get focused on the kids, you get focused on work, and you take your wife for granted. And I think that's probably one of the biggest mistakes that we all make as men. You know, and maybe there are a lot of guys out there that are much better than I am probably at it. But my tendency is to take my wife for granted and to not do those special things to make her feel special as well. And I think, you know, that's another big thing that, you know, as a husband, as a father, that requires a lot of work and that I need to work on. Yeah,
I know I need to work on that same exact thing. And it's, you know, what's an action item that you can take to do that?
I really think it's, you know, for me, and my wife has told me, it's simple, you know, just more, you know, the idea of just acknowledging her and saying, you know, some sort of compliment every day. If I could just make myself remember to give her one compliment every day, I swear that would probably be the easiest thing in the world and probably make a huge difference in our marriage.
Why don't we do that? My wife deserves exactly that, and I just don't do it. Despite being aware of it, like, why don't we do that?
I have no idea. I have been I've asked myself that question 1,000 times, and to the point where I'm like, should I just set something on my phone as like an alarm trigger to remind myself to, hey, give her a call and do this? And I think you just get so tied up with the daily things in life where you're just running from one task to the next, you know, picking the kids up from a sports event, getting home, you know, doing dinner, getting them in bed, doing the dishes. It's 9:00 and there you are, like, passed out on the couch.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's like, what happened to this day? You get up and you repeat the whole cycle again the next day. And I think, you know, too often we're just kind of spun up and we're just not thinking about what's really important out there. And I wish I had a good answer for you on that one, because I think that's probably one of my biggest problems right now is how do you remember to do that? How do you, and it's not that you don't remember because they don't deserve those compliments or they're not doing those things or you don't think your wife's beautiful. I don't know why you just don't think to verbalize that to them. And I think that's a male problem more than, you know, men just don't think sometimes like that. You know, that I need to verbalize how I feel. My wife should just know how I feel. And you assume they know how you feel, but they need affirmation. They need those words to remind them because they get tired, you know.
Do you think it's a product of our ego that we don't verbalize it? Like,
you know, I don't know. To me, it's mind-boggling because my wife has probably told me 1,000 times the things that I could do to make, you know, our relationship better, and it would just take something that simple.
Yeah.
You think that that would be so easy for me to do.
Yeah.
And then, you know, weeks will go by and I'll find myself, you know, that I haven't said anything like that in a week or two, and you think, how's that even possible? And I don't think that they could ever understand. They just see it as, you know, obviously they don't deserve those compliments or they don't deserve that praise. When there couldn't really be anything farther from the truth. It's just that we're just bad at verbalizing.
I've looked at my wife and thought, wow, she looks beautiful, and just didn't say it. I don't know why it didn't come out of me. I've even thought I should say it out loud, but for some reason I don't.
Yeah, I would agree. I've had those same thoughts, those same moments, and I wish I don't know what it is. I don't know it's got to be a male thing in some way, you know, that we just don't feel comfortable sharing those kind of things.
Afraid of the way it would land, maybe? Like maybe it's not the right time to say it, or there's probably never a wrong time to say it.
I was going to say, I think one thing I've gotten from my wife is there's never a wrong time, and you can never say those kind of things enough.
It never feels disingenuous or anything.
Right. So, I mean, I think... I just think that's one of those things that we all need to do better. I mean, I'm sure there are men out there who do a good job of that, but I would say they're the exception for sure. They're
just more in touch with themselves or more vulnerable to sharing feelings. Is that a practice that...
You know, one example that comes to mind is my brother-in-law. I mean, he's fantastic at doing that. And that's my wife's brother. So, you know, she sees him doing it all the time to his wife. And so obviously that makes me look bad. But, you know, it's he grew up with 2 sisters. I don't know if that's the difference.
I have 3 sisters. It
didn't matter.
No. I have 4 sisters. Yeah. I'm actively trying to be better, yet there's one obstacle after another in my own mind that prevents me from just saying it out loud.
And you know, the other thing too is, I mean, that's really important with daughters. I mean, you have to constantly give your daughters that same kind of affirmation as well.
I even have trouble sometimes doing that. It's easier because I don't feel as concerned about the way she reacts because she's 4.
Right.
But yeah, I totally agree.
And so, you know, I mean, that you want to build their self-confidence, because I think if you don't, they're going to look for that affirmation from other guys, you know, and probably at a younger age. And so really that's been a main focus as well.
Yeah. And having 4 daughters, I mean, that would require a lot of probably as emotional fortitude, the word I want to use, for somebody who grew up with a bunch of boys and then have a wife and 4 girls in the house that require what you're not accustomed to giving. Has got to be exhausting.
I mean, it definitely takes a lot of work, and but I realize the importance of it, and so that's, I think, been the biggest motivating factor in trying to be better at those things, is that the stakes are high, and failure is not really an option.
It's well said.
You just got to keep plugging away at it and keep working at it.
I think habits are the result of a period of discipline. So if you can discipline yourself to give those words of encouragement and affirmations, that eventually it becomes a habit and that it becomes easy and just part of your life. But transitioning from what you're used to where you need to be requires discipline. Discipline's hard.
For sure. The 2 books, so one of the books that's really helpful in that regard is called The 5 Love Languages.
Right.
I don't know if you've read that.
I haven't read it, but I'm familiar with the concept.
And so it's the idea that there are basically 5 different ways that people feel loved. And for my wife, clearly, it's one of the things is words of affirmation.
Right.
And that is, clearly her love language.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas mine would probably be more something like either there's physical touch. So I would think a lot of men, theirs would be that kind of like holding hands, more physical stuff in nature, kissing, those kind of things. But I think for women, a lot of them tend to fall in that words of affirmation category. And there's also acts of service. And I always think like, my wife should see my acts of service as, my kind of, going to work, supporting the family, doing the dishes, doing the chores. Like that's my way of showing her that I love her. But she doesn't speak that love language. So those things kind of almost like falling on deaf ears. Yeah. Almost like, you should do those kind of things. Like that doesn't show me anything. Mm-hmm. And so I think learning what it is that your spouse, values as the love language is important. So that's an interesting book. And then that personality book did come to mind. It's called Personality Plus. And that's a really interesting one. And just dealing with people in general, the different personality types and just how their mind works compared to how your mind works.
That's awesome. Well, I want to jump into a couple of kind of short answer questions or kind of rapid fire type stuff.
Sure.
I always have fun with this. And then after that, for anybody listening, I want to start getting a little bit more personal about vasectomies and the decisions associated with, making that change in your life. But first, if you could provide something, a gift to every father on the planet, what gift might you give them?
Are you talking like a physical gift or like a trait or?
I think whatever resonates with you would be a good answer.
For me, it would be patience.
Patience.
Yeah. If I could give myself that would be fantastic.
So how about a physical gift?
I don't know. I think at this point in time, I think it would probably be that book about the personalities. I think that was really helpful for me.
What is something that you learned about being a dad from your dad?
I would say, my dad, he went to the West Point Military Academy. He was, in the Army growing up, when I was growing up, and, flew helicopters, went to dental school, became a dentist. And so I think for me, just that hardworking nature is probably the biggest thing that I picked up from him.
Example.
Yeah, I mean, just watching him, and the type of person he was, always involved in the community and the way he treated people. Everybody always respected the way he treated them. And I think for me, that was probably the most important thing that I learned.
So what was unexpected? What was least expected about being a dad?
The emotional nature of girls, 100%. And having to deal with those emotions. We were sitting at the dinner table and just last night, some comment to my oldest daughter, and she just lost it. Why would you say that? I didn't do that. Jumped up from the table and ran into the living room, started crying in the couch, and I thought, man, what just happened? I was like, is this a preview of what the teenage years are going to be like? Because I don't think I'm going to make it. But it was just like, we were all just kind of like, what just happened there?
Everybody was that way.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Even the other girls were kind of like, what just happened? And so I think that kind of thing is different in women than in boys. And I think, to me, that's been the hardest thing to understand. We haven't even gotten to like, when they go through puberty and those kind of things. I'm going to be lost.
Goodness.
I'll be taking extra call during those years.
Is there a TV dad that you like?
TV dad. Oh man, I'm trying to think of some TV dads now. Oh, it's probably not. I probably can't say this anymore. But back in the day, I grew up with the Huxtables, and
yeah,
I always admired Cliff Huxtable.
Yeah.
The character, not the
course.
person in real life, but
of course.
You can't talk about Bill Cosby anymore, but
no, not anymore.
But yeah, like the dad that he was a doctor, right, on the show.
Yeah.
He was an OBGYN. Yeah. So the way he kind of balanced it, and he was always that kind of calm, dad, and he injected the humor into it a lot. I think if I had to pick one off the top of my head, it would be him.
I like it. So there's a question that Tim Ferriss asks. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a podcaster, among a lot of other things. That the question is, what message would you put on a billboard if you had a billboard on 95? All the dads on the planet are driving at 75 miles an hour past this billboard. What piece of advice might you put on that billboard?
So it's for like parenting advice?
Yeah.
Remember to give your children love and respect. I would think that would probably be it.
Love and respect. I think that's really great. The love part, I think, is, if you're paying attention, like, not that hard to love your kids, but the respect part, I think, is a challenge to look at a 5-year-old and respect that they're feeling a particular way, or their desire or want is justifiable to them,
right,
and okay. I think that's a really great answer. Respect.
And I think so many times you just want to dismiss their feelings, and they just want to be heard. They just want to be acknowledged. And something as simple as saying, "I understand that you want to do this, and the reasons you want to do this, but these are the reasons you can't do it." Mm-hmm. And I think just a simple explanation like that can sometimes make all the difference in the world.
So what are some milestones that you think of as dad that your kids or you have gone through?
I think, a huge milestone is when they get out of naps and diapers. I mean, that's just like a day that is, we're celebrating for sure. And we're almost on the end. Our youngest is 3, so she's kind of right on the edge of that. Mm-hmm. And I can imagine that's going to be a wonderful milestone, to be able to go places without having to bring a diaper bag, or thinking about where we're gonna find a place for her to do her nap. Those kind of things. And I think those are the biggest milestones. Going to school, starting elementary school and kindergarten, those kind of things are always fun.
Yeah.
They're all pretty young, so we haven't hit any of the major milestones yet.
So what is your greatest hope for your children?
I would say that they're happy, and they find, somebody someday that they can be happy with, and that they have a good life, and that they take time to experience the other side of it. I think too many times, even to this point in my life, I've been just so focused on what I was doing, mm-hmm. to not take time to look at the stuff around me. And
being present.
That's it. That's probably one of my biggest, problems. And so, I think, the things that my wife have taught me have just been incredible over our 10 years of marriage. Well, longer relationship, but mm-hmm. So it's, just being able to do those things. And it's hard because you just get sucked into life.
Yeah. Being a father to 4 girls, I think it'd be silly if I went any further without at least asking the question. Once you have a daughter, all your friends start talking about, oh my gosh, wait till they start dating when they're 14, 15, 16 or whatever. Are you going to be the dad with the shotgun at the door? Are you going to be like, in my observation, I think that daughters condition you to be ready for that by, like, my 4-year-old liking a boy at 4, or complimenting a boy. Like, I feel like they condition you for it. Do you find that you think you'll be ready for it?
I'm not sure that any dad is ever ready for that day. I think that's probably my biggest fear right now as a father, is the day that they start dating. And, we watch a lot of Dateline.
Yeah.
And we just happened to watch a horrible Dateline last night about, a guy who's abusing like his girlfriend. And, I think those are my biggest fears. But the one thing that I have, I think, a little bit of an advantage over most dads. I mean, everybody uses the gun thing, but I'm just gonna remind these young gentlemen, do you know what a urologist is? I can remove testicles for a living. So I want you to think about that tonight when you're out on your date, and just remember that the anesthesia part is optional. Yeah. Yeah. I think that will get in their heads even a little bit more than some of the other kind of threats out there.
It would be in my head, no doubt. Okay, so let's see. I feel like I had one more that I wanted to ask you. If this recording was to last for generations and generations, and your kids' could hear it, what kind of message might you like to deliver from this generation, or your experience, or life advice for them?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I would say, so generations from now, well, I hope people are still talking to each other, first of all.
Face to face.
Yeah, actually having interactions and not all electronic by then. But I would say, take time to enjoy the important things in life, love each other, and really treat each other with respect. I think if you can follow those simple things, you will have a good life.
Awesome. All right, well, let's jump into some medical talk here for a little bit.
Yeah.
So for those who are still listening, the way that we met is we went to, my wife scheduled a consultation for me for a vasectomy. And so right away, I felt a great rapport with you and great confidence in you, which is why I wanted to do this interview. But I'd like to kind of rehash that consultation and ask a couple questions for the benefit of anybody who might be thinking about
definitely
signing up for one. So, what's the average person like that's coming in to get a consultation?
I would say probably average is going to be somebody in their kind of late 30s, early 40s who have 2 kids. Probably on average, it's 2 kids.
Yeah.
Most commonly when it's 2, it's a boy and a girl, it seems like. But,
Yeah.
There are a lot of, 2 boys or 2 girls that get vasectomies as well. But I would say that's probably the average.
Tell you what, tell me what is a vasectomy.
So basically, there are tubes that carry the sperm from the testicles to the urethra tube. And basically, a vasectomy is removing a segment or clipping that tube so that the sperm cannot get out anymore. So that's basically the idea of a vasectomy. The procedure varies in length depending on the person doing it. On average, it takes me about 15 to 20 minutes to do the procedure. It's done right in a clinic. The majority, probably 95% of them, are done awake under local anesthesia. But you do get some guys who are just very anxious people, and right off the bat, usually you can tell who those guys are going to be. And I might recommend that they do that under anesthesia. Certainly anybody can have it done anytime under anesthesia. I mean, that's always an option. You always add the risks of anesthesia and also the cost associated with the anesthesia to the procedure. But in general, the majority of people do it right in the clinic.
So you've had a vasectomy. Like, what does that feel like when that's happening?
So the best way to describe it, and I've described this to people and they agree as well, it's kind of like somebody, when you were in high school and guys would go around flicking each other in the testicles.
Yeah.
It's that flick feeling when the numbing medicine goes in. And so it's about, 10 to 30 seconds where that medicine's kind of taking effect. They kind of feel like somebody flicked you down there. And I think that's probably the best way to describe it. But once that medicine kicks in, pretty much at that point, you are numb from that point on. It's like going to the dentist. You feel that needle stick in the gums. You feel the medicine going in, but then once it sets in, something's going on up there, but you don't really feel a lot of pain.
So what's the procedure itself like? Like, what are you using? Where are you going in?
So you basically you can make a single or 2 incisions. Most urologists tend to do 2 incisions just because of the risk of grabbing the same tube through a single incision.
Okay.
So kind of by putting those incisions out to either side, you're ensuring you're getting each side done. And the size of the incision is, it's probably like maybe a centimeter, probably not even that. It's probably like 6 millimeters. I mean, it's a tiny, tiny incision. It can be done either with a scalpel blade, or there are some people who advertise the no scalpel technique. It's basically just a pointy instrument that kind of creates the hole. Either way, you're ending up with the same size hole.
Okay.
And the tube's brought up through that hole. This is probably more information than most guys want, but the tube is brought up to the hole, a segment is removed, and then some people put clips on the end, some people tie them off. I tend to burn in either end to kind of seal them, and then pull some tissue up over one end to bury it so that those tubes really can't find each other again. They say there's a less than 1% chance of them somehow growing back together, and that's why we do check a sample at 3 months to make sure that everything's good.
Okay, and so how long, after you have a procedure like that until you are kind of back to your daily life?
I would say about 2 weeks, where you want to avoid any heavy lifting, strenuous activity, intercourse, those kind of things for about a 2-week period. I find the guys that push it too soon are the ones that tend to get the problems. I've done so many and seen so many patients have issues after who did things too soon that I took a full week off and I stayed away from my activities for about a month. I mean, I do Taekwondo and CrossFit, so they're a little bit more physically involved anyway, so I wanted to give myself a full month to recover. And I think really the expectation, and I think a lot of guys there's some guys who minimize it, some guys who make it sound horrible, but a lot of guys will say, yeah, I was up golfing the next day and or going back to work, and I think it's lucky that you were able to do it that soon, but it should not be the expectation. The expectation should be about a 2-week recovery.
So the 2-week recovery, and I've heard people say, yeah, the reason that people push it is because they feel like they can, like the pain is gone. Like, how long does the pain subsist?
I think for me, I didn't really take any pain medication afterwards. I mean, it was sore, kind of like you'd been kicked with a ball, kind of sore a couple days later.
Sure.
But as long as you weren't doing anything too strenuous, it was manageable. Ice, putting some ice on there, resting on the couch. But I think you're right. I think people get deceived into thinking, hey, this isn't so bad, so I'm going to go and do, mow the lawn or do something that they shouldn't have done. And I think guys in particular are bad about that kind of stuff, just sitting there and taking it easy. Yeah. And so I think fighting that temptation is the biggest thing.
So tell me why a guy would get a vasectomy rather than a woman having, like, the expression I've heard is tubes tied. I don't know if that's...
Sure. So in order to have a tubal ligation, you do need to go to sleep. So you do add anesthesia to that mix. And also, they have to do the surgery as kind of intra-abdominal. So there's a lot more things that could be injured in the process. So if you're going to compare the two procedures side by side, it's much, much safer for a guy to have a vasectomy than it is for a girl to have a tubal ligation.
So if a guy has a vasectomy, and what is that? Do you end up getting stitches from those incisions?
So there are 2 sutures. It depends on who you go to. I don't put any sutures in the skin edge themselves. Those incisions just kind of seal up on their own. But there are people who do put sutures in the skin. I actually initially had the sutures in, but I found them quite unpleasant and actually removed them the day after surgery. Yeah. Just because I knew I could do that. And I that was just kind of confirmation as to how I'd been doing it the way I'd been doing it without putting them in. And these incisions are so small. I mean, sometimes it's hard to even see them the day or two after surgery. Let's face it, that thing isn't the prettiest looking thing to begin with. You're not going to notice 2 tiny incisions in there in the long term for sure.
Okay, so it's really, if you went looking for it, you may or may not even find it, a scar or something. Yeah. So after vasectomy, what happens to, if your sperm's not going through the urethra anymore, where's it going?
So basically, your body still tends to produce it, but what happens is, because you're not releasing that sperm, the production goes way down. Your body tends to resorb some of the sperm and break down the old sperm. But there are some guys who get a little bit of a swelling of the epididymis, which is the structure that stores sperm, and sometimes you can develop pain from that. Some of the chronic pain issues can be from the backup of sperm fluid. And 2 times in my career, I've actually reversed vasectomies for that reason. Yeah. But it's very uncommon to have something like that happen.
Well, that's a good segue into why, 1, you can reverse a vasectomy, and 2, why would someone do that?
I think... for me, I have a little bit different perspective because I was in the Army for a while. And, in the Army, the people tend to do things at an accelerated rate. Yeah. So a lot of these guys go off to basic training at 18. They meet some girl, when they're out there on their own for the first time. They get married at 20. By 24, they have 3 kids, and they're like living on a private or a specialist salary trying to raise 3 kids, and they're like, this is it, I can't do it anymore, I need a vasectomy. And unfortunately, a lot of those marriages don't last, in the long term, and so you end up seeing them back in their 30s or 40s, new spouse, looking to have kids again. And so, I had at times a list of 30 or 40 people wanting a vasectomy reversal when I was in the Army.
Wow.
In the 5 years I've been here in Warrenton, I've had maybe one person ask me for a reversal in comparison. So I think it was just a little bit different situation, but that was the most common reason. There are alternatives even to having it reversed. IVF, the in vitro fertilization, that can actually be done by harvesting sperm directly from the testicle or the epididymis, and then using that for the in vitro fertilization. So that's an option as well.
Does
after
the quality
vasectomy.
Of sperm change after you've had a vasectomy?
Definitely. So in the sense that if you do the vasectomy reversal, there are a lot of, your body actually develops antibodies against your own sperm.
No kidding.
In a weird way, the body protects the sperm from the immune system, but once you've had the vasectomy, those two they can mix into the point where your body actually sees your sperm as a like a virus or bacteria, like in that regard, and they form antibodies to it. So a lot of times the reason a vasectomy reversal is not successful is because of the quality of the sperm afterward.
Interesting.
And the numbers tend to be a lot lower. And also you're trying to basically keep a pinhole tube open when you reverse it.
Yeah.
And any little bit of scar tissue is enough to kind of close that tube off. So while it is reversible, if you're thinking about a vasectomy, it should not be thought of as a reversible procedure for that reason.
Fair enough. So after vasectomy, does it impact your sex drive, yes or no? And what's coming out when you ejaculate if sperm's not coming out?
So 90% of that fluid that comes out in general, maybe even a little bit more, is coming from the prostate and these two things called the seminal vesicles. And that's just strictly a fluid that is in general a carrier for the sperm. It kind of keeps the sperm alive as it travels. And so that fluid is still there and present. So in theory, you won't notice a huge difference in the volume or even the anything. You shouldn't notice any changes in ejaculation. You shouldn't notice any pain with ejaculation, and certainly it should not affect erections in any way, or testosterone level, which are two of the biggest questions that I get. How is this going to affect my sex drive, and how is it going to affect my erections? And it shouldn't in any way. Just one thing that pops into my mind, another common thing, what are the risks of having the procedure done? I don't think we've really kind of talked about that.
No.
But I would say, with any surgery, there's 3 main risks: bleeding, infection, and chronic pain. And so bleeding, because that area is kind of a stretchy area, it takes a lot of bleeding to generate enough pressure to stop the bleeding. And that's why you can get a hematoma or a collection of blood that swells up the size of a grapefruit or a softball after the procedure. Fortunately, that's exceedingly rare. I've been doing this for 15 years. Like you had mentioned, I've done over 2,000 vasectomies. I've only had that happen 2 times. And both guys are doing things they shouldn't have been doing after the procedure. So in general, it's exceedingly rare. Infection is the same, very, very rare. It just so happened that both of those hematomas, collections of blood, got infected, and the same patients are the only 2 infections I've ever had.
Yeah.
So kind of when it rains, it pours type of thing. But it's very rare for both of those things to happen. Chronic pain is something that I would say is a little bit more common. I would say I had intermittent pain for up to 3 to 4 months afterward, which was a little bit surprising to me. And it would be random, not that I was doing anything. It would just suddenly come on. It would be maybe on one side, and it would just kind of go away on its own.
It's like testicular pain?
Yeah, just kind of like an ache, like what just happened there,
Yeah.
Like you got kicked or hit the wrong way. And I think that was a big surprise to me that it lasted that long. And then just one day it stopped, and it's been, 8 months since that point, and I haven't had any more issues. But there are some guys where that becomes a more permanent problem. It's rare, but that is something that, has to be taken into consideration when deciding.
Did you have any nerves going into your procedure?
I think anytime you have anything done, you always have a little bit of apprehension. I think probably the nerves were more of, am I making the right decision?
Yeah.
Than the surgery. I've seen it so many times that I knew it was kind of a easy procedure, and the guy who did mine was one of the guys who trained me in residency, so I trusted him immensely. So I think from that standpoint, but when you're in the medical field, you realize that you can do everything perfectly and things can still go wrong. And I think sometimes for people who aren't in the medical field, it's hard to understand that side of it. I mean, why someone has a spontaneous bleed inside there or something, who knows?
Yeah.
You know, and you can do 2,000 vasectomies, not have an infection, and then one day you have an infection. You do everything exactly the same all the time. And so there are other factors that we can't control, and I think those kind of things make you a little bit nervous, you know, the unexpected.
So talking about mindset coming into a vasectomy, like I told you that right now I'm sure, but I don't feel like I'm mature enough to make that decision for 40-year-old me. Like I just don't know. But right now I know I don't want to have any more kids, but in 2 years my mind might change. Like, have you seen a percentage of your clients afterwards that kind of wish they hadn't done it?
You know, since I've been in Warrenton, I've only had I think of one guy who came back wanting a reversal. So, you know, I would say it's very rare. Now, I don't see a lot of people in follow up from that. You know, if people are doing well, they don't come back from that standpoint.
Right.
That being said, you should do a semen sample at 3 months to make sure there's zero sperm.
Yeah.
In typical guy fashion, only about 25% of guys actually get that done.
Sure.
So but the I think kind of lost my train of thought there. Where are we going with that?
Just the number of people that kind of regret
second guess.
going through it.
Yeah, and I think it's tough because I think if you like being a parent and you like kids, and you're never going to be fully sure that you made the right decision. You know, I think you can look as your kids get older, and now we have a 3-year-old, and think, man, could we have done this one more time? Probably.
Yeah.
Should we have done it one more time? Maybe. You know. I know my wife feels that way, you know, and she definitely is what I would consider a bit of a baby addiction, you know, so I think I'm not sure she'd ever be satisfied. And but she's to the point where she even like, should we consider IVF type of thing? So I think even when you're sure, you're not sure.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, for me, 4 girls, that's pretty much my limit. I would be fine, you know, moving on to the next phase of life. But I think if she had her way, we'd have 2 more.
Yeah.
For sure.
How about the percentage of people, like what would you say the level of certainty is of the people that you see? Like, there's some people that go into it a little indecisive and just kind of go through it anyway?
I think everybody kind of goes back and forth, is my opinion. You know, I see a lot of people kind of going. There are certainly those people who are like, I've always wanted to have 2. 2 is it. I can't afford more than 2. And, you know, they're very adamant that this is what they want to have done. They want it done the next day if they can have it done the next day. Yeah. But I think the majority of guys, you know, they really have to, you know, and couples have to think about it. And sometimes one partner is more sure than the other. And that makes it tough too, you know, because, you know, it's especially when you have the situation where you have 4 daughters and you're thinking, man, what if we try one more time and we can have that son, you know? And I think those are the kind of things that make it tempting. But I think, you know, and people always told us you'll know when you're ready. That's what other advice you would get from other couples. And I don't know that I ever felt that way, or that I don't know that I ever would feel that way necessarily. I think you're always going to have some reservations.
I always made a difference between being sure and being right.
Right. And I think, you know, the other thing too is there's so many, you see so many couples out there who had 2 kids and then they never had anything permanent done, and they have that, you know, kind of third whoops kind of baby. And they always say the same thing, you know, I can't imagine my life without that child. I'm so happy we had that child. And so even someone who was at that time had, you know, 2 older kids, was so sure they didn't want to have another kid, consider that one of the best things that ever happened to them. So I think, you know, it's really just it's a tough decision, but I think for me, the things that made the decision easier, you know, we had 4 healthy kids. And my wife made it through pregnancy 4 times without any major issues. And, you know, every time you have a pregnancy, you're tempting fate a bit, you know, from that side of things. I mean, it's not guaranteed to go perfect. The older, you know, your wife gets, I mean, the more likelihood that there are complications with the delivery, the babies themselves. And, you know, after 35, the incidence of Down syndrome and some of the other things tend to go up as well. And so those things factor in, and just, you know, how old are you going to be when those kids are going through high school and college? And, you know, do you want to be 80 years old when they're walking down the stage at college, or will you even be here at 80 years old? And I think those things tend to make the decision easier when you start to look at it from that standpoint. That can help you take out the emotionalness of, it's wonderful having another kid and another baby, but we can barely make it to the sports for 2 kids and we have 4. So what are we going to do when all 4 are in sports or in choir or whatever they decide to do. Especially when you don't have that local support. Some people have their parents in town, and grandparents are great to help you in those situations. But when you're kind of on your own with 4 kids, you don't have a lot of options to help you out. Yeah. And so for me, those are the idea that we had to, and we have to give them attention too. I mean, at some point I felt like 4 daughters requires a lot of emotional attention, including a wife on top of that. It's, at some point you're emotionally exhausted.
So much time a day. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Jesse, having 7 kids, said it. At some point, the oldest 5 are entertaining the other 2, and they don't even want us around. Right.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. I mean, you do get more help the more you have, I suppose. But
yeah. Well, so you said something about even being around at 80, which made me want to ask the question, as a urologist, I'm sure you do other things outside of performing vasectomies. Is any of that like people coming in to do screenings for their overall, health in that, do you have, is this an opportunity for a PSA for anybody that should come in and see you?
And fortunately, not only is it a PSA, but my PSA would be about PSA. So, I think that for guys, that's the number one thing you have to consider. I mean, I think colonoscopy is also equally important. The incidence of colon cancer and prostate cancer are, second only to lung cancer in American men. And I think, obviously with the lung cancer thing, if you're a non-smoker, it's not as much of an issue. But when it comes to colon and prostate cancer, they don't tend to discriminate. And I think, getting your colonoscopy at age 50, younger if you have family history of colon cancer. I mean, really, you should probably start around 40. Yeah. And I think the same really applies for PSA and prostate cancer. If you have a family history of prostate cancer, you're much higher risk of having it yourself, and you need to start getting your PSA checked. At 40 for family history and 50 for everybody else.
So what is PSA? That's a level.
It's simply just a blood test. Yep, okay. And it's a level of that PSA in your bloodstream, and there are certain conditions that cause that to be elevated. Prostate cancer being one. The test itself's got a lot of bad press, but it's our only way at this point, reliable way of detecting prostate cancer, and it saves lives. We do see these guys who come in, with really aggressive cancers, and we're able to stop and kind of nip them before they get out of control. And I think the majority of prostate cancers are slow growing and not aggressive, and we can nowadays observe those kind of prostate cancers, but it's still the number 2 cancer death in American men.
Wow,
and most people don't know that about prostate cancer.
I had no idea.
And really 300,000 guys a year will die from prostate cancer.
Wow.
300,000 a year will have it, 30,000 will die from it. So about 10% of that, of the total number. So it's still, second only to lung cancer as far as cancer in American men. And it's one of those things you just want to, it's a harmless blood test, prostate exam, get it done once a year. And it can save your life. And same with colonoscopies, even less. It's like usually every 10 years unless you have a family history.
Start at 40 or 50 and...
Yeah. And I mean, the more I see, the more I do, the more I think, hey, even at 42, should I be getting my first colonoscopy? I mean, because you see some crazy stuff out there. And when you're a dad, it's not only about you and your health. You need to take care of yourself for your family, because you need to be around for them. And so you kind of have to get over some of those fears that you have about maybe going to see the doctor or getting a blood test drawn or whatever, because again, it's not really just about you. It's about the health and well-being of your family for the long term.
So do you give anybody advice on how to change their lifestyle to be healthier?
Oh, certainly. I mean, anybody who comes in who's smoking, I tell them it's the single best thing you can do for your health and for those around you as well. Yeah. And I think, that's the hardest. It's really hard for me to understand why people still smoke with all the evidence that's out there and all the stuff that we know about it.
Young people.
And it's just getting addicted at a young age and not being able to shake it. And I think it's certainly a heavy addiction, so I understand from that standpoint, but it's the single best thing you can do for your health in so many levels.
Yeah.
And a lot of guys don't know. I mean, it's one of the biggest causes of erectile dysfunction as well,
which
is not commonly known. But it's that damage to the small blood vessels that supply the blood, flow down there. And so I think it's another. Sometimes you can talk about cancer all you want, but as soon as you say that, they're like, wait, smoking causes what? So and they're a little bit listening a little bit more after that. But
they know where the incentives are.
Right. So I would say from a general health, those would be my 2 pieces of advice.
Cool.
And exercise,
Yeah. Don't smoke, exercise, and eat okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is hard. The eating part's the hardest I think for all of us. Yeah.
Everything is.
Who doesn't love a good burger or steak?
It's also readily available. Try to go eat a healthy meal on $10 within.
Yeah.
You go to the Natural Marketplace. That's my mom's store. But
Oh, nice.
everywhere else, it's hard to find.
Yeah.
You
definitely.
really got to work hard. Well, any parting words of wisdom? Fatherhood. You're a doctor.
I would say just keep working at it. I mean, it's hard. Keep working at yourself, being a better person, and being a better father, better husband, and it all kind of falls into place. That's all we can do.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Learned a ton. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
So we're picking the recording back up kind of abruptly because after talking, we realized that there was a great topic to bring up. So please go ahead.
Yeah, so I think a lot of patients and I myself struggle with the idea that, some religions believe that having a vasectomy or using birth control is wrong. And I think that is a major factor in a lot of guys' decision on whether or not to proceed. And the idea that is particularly in the Catholic faith that all forms of birth control are considered to be a sin. And I think that becomes a really tough topic. And I've seen some guys really struggle with that. I also really struggle with that and the fact that I'm doing vasectomies. Am I doing something wrong in doing the vasectomies in general? And I wish that I had a good answer, for that. The thing that I always kind of think about is, what are the teachings, in the Bible itself? Is there any guidance on that? And unfortunately, I mean, probably the concept of a vasectomy back then was not even relevant. And what can be extrapolated to that? And I've never been able to really find anything to give me a peace of mind one way or the other. I've always been concerned about the religious aspect and where men try to make rules and try to dictate the way, over kind of regulate the way people live their lives. And I think, for those who out there who believe in Jesus and who are religious from that side of things, I think the whole reason he came was to say, hey, you guys are making this too complicated. All these human rules that have been added over the years are making being a religious person too cumbersome. Mm-hmm. And does this fall in that category? I don't know. But that's probably the only thing that gives me any kind of consolation in the fact that I've had one and done one. But I thought it was important to address that from those guys who are out there thinking about that, should I do this from a moral, religious standpoint? And it's a big factor in a lot of guys' decisions to proceed with a vasectomy.
So do you suggest that they go speak to somebody in their church about it, or is that answer already known?
See, I think, the problem with, especially someone who's Catholic, I mean, clearly when you go to the priest, they're going to give you that answer that this is wrong. And I think all I can tell you is probably just to do as much research as you can on the topic yourself, find out why it is that that rule was ever created to begin with. What is the kind of reasoning behind it? Do you feel it strongly that is something that you should adhere to? Or do you feel like it's responsible from some standpoint to not just keep having kids without the resources to help raise them? And I think it's a tough decision. And I may be making the wrong decision or, doing a terrible thing by doing these vasectomies. But, I think at some point, it becomes difficult to just keep having children, mm-hmm. and it's stressful in life and in marriage, and times can be in some ways unfair to the other kids, mm-hmm. the more you have. But I see plenty of big families at St. John's who are doing really great, and they make it look easy. Yeah. So, maybe they have the correct answer.
I think that was a great reason to have a bonus answer.
Very good.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yep.